All right, welcome back everyone. Like I promised in my previous video, I wanted to give you guys a little bit more insight into the Policy Manager as a tool and how we use that to manage gateways to understand a little bit more about the APIs that we're using and managing. So, as you can see, I've got the Policy Manager open right now. It is an application, so you either have to download it, install it, or find some sort of distribution for it. So there's not a web-based version for the Policy Manager in this current release. There used to be one a long time ago. We've gotten away from that. So, anyways, like we talked about in our first video, there are several different right sizing or best practices that we recommend. You can see I've got all of this right here. So feel free to take a look at our previous video to talk about Policy Manager best practices. But if you want the cheat sheet, here's all the settings we did. So what we're going to do is connect to the gateway. And what I can tell you a little bit about right now is we have a couple options here. So you've got a username password combination or you've got a client certificate combination. If you're going to use a client certificate, I highly recommend getting that installed, having some sort of well-formed certificate authority that's going to back that cert. Some things can happen if you're doing a self-signed cert. If it expires, you can lose access to your gateway. It's always good to have a admin password backup, but we're going to just use admin password for today. So I will log into the gateway, and there's a couple things that are going to pop up here. So what this warning shows up, and I want to explain this warning a little bit. Warning says, hey, the host name entered for this gateway, that was the IP that we entered in. The gateway presented a certificate saying it's from this EC2 instance. That makes sense. We're hosting this gateway on AWS, so this makes sense. If these values don't line up, you can have, in this case, a potential certificate mismatch, and that's what they're warning you about. If you are confident that what you are logging into is the same as the certificate, then you're fine. If this is a gateway that you're used to managing or that you are kind of inheriting, this is an expected warning. Just click on through it. So it'll log in, and we'll give it a second to pull up here. And one of the things we're going to look at immediately is more in depth onto this menu bar. So I'm going to give it a second here. And when we get into there it is. When we get into different parts of this policy manager, like I said, I wanted to do a one-on-one on what this policy manager can do and what it can't do. So we'll start at the top. We'll go through some of the other options. So when you have identity providers, anyone who's familiar with using Keycloak or anything else where there's identity providers, this is essentially how users are going to authenticate within your gateway. And this is typically on the request side. So not users who are coming into your policy manager. This is users who are using your service. So you can hook up with LDAP, you can hook up with federated identity provider. This is where we usually do certificate authorities. And so we can federate against some of these things. We can call it temp federation. We'll base it on X509s, but you can include SAMLs as well. And then you could add some trusted certificates. So the identity provider section really is the bulk of your trust. There's another section down here for certificates. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Users and authentication. This is the internal bit of gateway authentication. So we kind of looked at external users coming in, how to federate that. This is the internal users. So the gateway uses internal database to look at usernames, passwords, certificate combos, things like that. So typically when we're creating users, we're going to create an internal user. And you can create a group of users or a group to assign users into, and then they can have zones and role policies and things like that as well. But typically, we're just creating internal users. Those internal users will have a password scheme or certificate that they get added into that can be determined through this define additional properties. So if your users are coming in through certificates to log into the policy manager, log into the gateway, you will click this define additional properties. You still have to assign them a password. but then when you add their certificate into this, that will override this password, and this password will be disabled. Can't use it anymore. It'll just be on the certificate. For creating users with certificates, this username has to be the CN or common name of the certificate that they are requesting as. So we can do a whole thing on certificates and all the fun stuff associated with that a little later, but I wanted to give you guys the heads up that your username has to be the CN if you're going to use certificate authentication. And further in here, there's a lot of stuff in the users and authentication, as you can imagine. This is where you can administrate password policies, certificates, revoke issues. So this is kind of your authentication hub right here. If you want to get into roles and security zones like we talked about with internal groups, this is where you'd also manage that. And if you're using any sort of Kerberos tickets or KNITs, this is where you can also manage your Kerberos configuration. Again, this is all for users logging into this gateway to manage, maintain, view, what have you. This is not for external users using service endpoints within the gateway. And so we also have services and APIs. So this is the section where I start telling everyone that there are always 2 or 3 ways to do something in the API gateway, especially in the Layer 7 API Gateway. So you have the ability to create APIs. That's primarily what we're going to be focusing on in this series of tutorials. But you also have the ability to publish services, reverse proxies, things like that. You can perform all these actions here. You can perform them, most of them, here. And then you can also click on items, or right-click on items, and publish them within either the server component or in a folder as well. So all of these possibilities, you can do them a couple different ways. Transports is a section, if you are new to Layer 7, you probably won't be doing much of the management. This is starting to focus on the actual network communications of the gateway itself. So in a section here, we've got all ports and protocols that are available for this gateway. We can come in, we'll use 8080 since I'm not actually using that. You can come in and look at the properties for this specific port. It will tell you what it can and cannot do. You can change what it can and cannot do. And then reading the Broadcom tech docs, there is an advanced section. This is, they're not joking. You should add additional sections here, only as directed by CA Technologies, well, really Broadcom now. This is where you can do some advanced things with the gateway. I don't know if it's even in scope for the tutorials that I want to put out for this. There are some resources online. Maybe we'll do something later. So moving right along, and then there's other things we can do within the transport section. Like I've said, this is mainly generating network connectivity, different external, internal operations. Certificates are going to be some of the most used sections in our tasks. We have the ability to come in and look at various certificates that are loaded, that are trusted, adding, importing. The one thing I want to mention is if you go into add, if you want to add a new certificate from a website that you are familiar with, you can actually come in here. You can add the certificate for Google in this case, and this will actually come in and retrieve the Google cert. So it does not require you to get a PEM file, to have it loaded in, to have it emailed to you or dropped, or however that's going to happen. If you are dealing with a domain that you can readily reach, you can add server certificates in that way. It's a fairly easy way to do that. The other way is to come through and physically import them, and that's where you are either looking at files, or that's where you are looking at some sort of additional import capabilities. So I wouldn't recommend that unless that's what you're given, and then you've got that ability. Similarly, you can manage private keys, stored passwords. I'm not going to open those. Those are a little bit more sensitive. but you can see pretty quickly where that capability is. So JDBC connections is also a relatively sensitive. There, I had to make sure we didn't have any passwords in the clear there. Relatively sensitive panel. You can see here we've got some OAuth connections. That's because we're running the OTK. But we have the ability to come through here and create username password combinations to reach out to databases. And that could be internal databases, that could be external databases, a lot of different options there. Global settings is where we get into some more of the nuts and bolts on the management side, some of the things that the gateway can reach out and listen to or is capable of touching. And what we've got here is cluster-wide properties. These are going to be properties that are allowed through the gateway that allow us to show or hide various things. We come in here to add something. You'll see we've got a drop down of most of the possible cluster-wide properties. There are also some hidden ones that they're not shown by default. You have to go in and actually kind of hunt them out. I will say the Broadcom Tech Docs are a fantastic resource to figure out all of the potential combinations of cluster-wide properties. And we'll talk about using them a little bit later. Similarly, we have scheduled tasks. Scheduled tasks are similar to cron jobs. So we can look at cron jobs relatively easily here. These are cron jobs, but they're going to load gateway resources instead. So you see we've got a lot of OTK database maintenance. These are things that are happening at the token lifestyle or life cycles. But then we also have where every minute we are loading some OTel data. And what we can do is actually come in here. All nodes are going to be present for this. I'm sorry, every 1 second, not every 1 minute. Essentially come in and perform an action, load OTel data. We can see it down here. We made a little service property that allows us to run a bunch of information through. So we'll talk about all of this in a later video. And then finally, we talk about extensions and add-ons. So we've got the ability here to look at some of the plugins, some of the additional things that we have available to us. You'll see we can manage encapsulated assertions. I will say until we get to enroll with Portal, these are already in here by default. And then I believe the XMPP connections are as well. I've added 2 things since here. I've added a tactical assertion. It's called Manage Remote Caches. And then also manage WebSocket connections. I believe this is included for 11.1, but feel free to check me on that. The other thing, we were talking about the OAuth toolkit earlier, and we're looking at the solution kits. This is where the OAuth solution kit is installed. So this is the OTK. It gets installed as a solution kit, not as a plugin. So just some things to consider when you are building out your gateway. And then the last thing in our tasks dropdown is logging and auditing. Now, like I said, there's 3 ways to do anything in the gateway. This is one of those. So you can manage your log and audit syncs. You can also do this through some of the file configurations in the gateway. So this can still be managed in other spots, and this can even be managed in the database. I probably won't have a tutorial on how to manage things from the database, just because there's a lot of considerations to be had there. So that would be a much later down the line conversation. And then we have the ability to configure audit alerts. I usually have this disabled just because I'm auditing a lot. And so as part of my customer, part of the clients that I work with, they tend to audit more than what is recommended. And there are some pros and cons to that. Performance being the largest con, but you can always make your gateways bigger. And then, so that does it for the tasks. Looking at the view, there are a lot of things that we can get into, can look at. What I want to make sure, and this kind of goes into the best practices, is that we always have hide comments and hide assertion numbers, kind of with this X status here. We always want to be showing comments. We always want to be showing assertion numbers. But this panel really allows you to modify the things that you're seeing on the screen within the user interface. What I will say is probably one of the more powerful subtools of the Policy Manager is the Policy Manager dashboard. So if we come in here, we can bring that over. We can at a glance see all of the traffic on the gateway, and we're looking at a 60-second view. Your default will probably be 5 seconds. We have the ability to come in here and look at either a quick hour column, a 60-second column, or a daily column. And why I think this is one of the most powerful tools of the Policy Manager is the ability to come in and actually look at errors that are happening. So at a quick glance, I can see everything that's going on for the last 2 days on my gateway. I can see if there are any issues. I can actually right-click on these, show the corresponding audit events that were being generated as a result of this, and I can bring over everything that we've got. So instead of hunting for logs, instead of looking at all of the potential issues that might be happening, I can come through and I can very easily sort based on time, based on severity, service, and message. And message is where we're going to start looking at these things. So there's my error in assertion processing. I can look at the logs associated for that. We got a status 601 failure. This is something that we can use to our advantage when we start looking at OpenTelemetry, which is a video in the future. I'm doing a great job just telling you guys about all the stuff that we're still gonna send you. But this gives you that insight as to what is going on within your gateway. If you want to expand your view even further, you can do a daily swath, and that's a 60-day look. You can see right here we had a lot of issues in this time. So what we typically recommend doing is, if you're going to be managing a gateway, you should be looking at this at least once a day. If you're really going to be managing a gateway, I recommend highly that you move this to some sort of observability framework, whether that's OpenTelemetry or FileBeat or something where you can aggregate and visualize results. This dashboard is a great start into getting that insight, but the onus of getting alerts, getting maybe email notifications or some sort of notification that something's going wrong, especially as you get closer to a production level system, becomes more and more imperative. So I would highly recommend, so you don't have this where your gateway is having issues for 10 or 12 days, to get some sort of observability framework. We can talk about that too. And then finally, the audits that we were looking at from the dashboard, full thing can be viewed here. The logs that we were looking at from the dashboard can be viewed here. I will note that all of these log files can be set and managed within the Manage Log and Audit Syncs. We have the ability to come in here through the SSG. That's going to be your primary log sync. And you can see we've got this set up to be a 20 megabyte file. We're going to keep 10 of these. You can roll these daily instead, and then your file structure, your file name will look a little different. Instead of being SSG 0, SSG 1, 2, it will actually have your timestamp. So some users prefer that if they're going back several days, several weeks, several months, but it's all personal preference. And then finally, saved events is if you choose to export any of your gateways or gateway events to a file on your file system, you can come in and look at that a little bit further as well. So that is the main taskbar. Oh, and then I suppose we can talk about licenses and about and their help system. Licenses just has your license. About has a little bit of information about the Policy Manager itself, where you can find various things, what version of Java the gateway is running on. So it really goes past just the file or just the policy manager itself. It kind of goes into some of the gateway versions as well. And then we still have the good old CA Technologies, Broadcom company. So that was the top menu. There's a lot of other things we can go into. You'll notice that when I'm logged in, I don't see that policy manager homepage. If you do ever want to bring it back in, you can, there's a little button at the top here where you can start using that. I typically have a lot of different tabs up here, so the home screen just kind of clutters up the routes for me. And then if you ever want to go back into your preferences without going through the main nav bar, you've got this, this bar. You're able to view all those preferences as well. The only thing I will note is sometimes the disconnect button is really close to the connect button, and also very close to tasks. So I have done this more than one time. I'm sure you guys will do this more than one time, where you mean to click on the tasks or the view, which are the two most widely used sub navbar items, and you'll hit the disconnect. So don't feel bad, get angry. That's what I do too. Happens to the best of us. The other thing I'll note is as assertions come in and as various service endpoints come in, you may from time to time want to hit the refresh. This is going to do a full refresh on the system. You'll see I'm spinning here. It essentially pulls the database, makes sure everything's synced again. We will talk about policy manager databases and how the SSG interacts with all of this a little bit later. So what you can do is you can find assertions and identity providers up in this top left panel. This is where you can come in, you can write in something. If there is a find and search capability, if you do click on it, it will take you to the folder it's in. The only reason why I use this quite often is there are a lot of folders and there are subfolders and there's just a lot of stuff. I think there's somewhere about 600 different assertions, and you can get into a lot by there. So sometimes just looking around, trying to figure out what you're trying to do, that can help. And then, like we talked about, we've got identity providers. So I've got the internal identity provider, which is always up. I have a certificate validator, which validates all my certificate authorities. So when a user comes in providing a certificate, I can validate them that way. And then just for fun, I threw an LDAP in there for a free LDAP provider that gives us some LDAP capabilities that I was testing as well. Down in here, you'll have a similar search capability, but instead of assertions, you are looking for endpoints. So endpoints can be found here. If you click on this, it will not only select it down here, it will also bring it up into your policy window. You will notice that there are assertion numbers on the left, and maybe I don't have any comments in here, but you have the ability to view comments as well. So we can do that at the folder level, at the IP level, or at the server level, and we just kind of have a good structure for all of our general policy fragments as well as users sandboxes, and getting down into some testing or some higher level routes. So we will talk about routing and creating your first policy in our next video. I want to thank you all for joining me today. Hopefully you've learned something, and feel free to ask me questions in the comments. I'll get to them as quickly as I can. So you guys have a good rest of your day. I'll talk to you later.